Welcome back to Authentically Peculiar with Marcia. Ready for the second episode of Trauma Bond. And this time we're talking about trauma bonds and relationship. When you think about relationships, you think about the connections and the interconnections of the various relationships that you have. But oftentimes they're linked to some form of trauma. In that trauma connection, you may often find yourself struggling to try to figure out, where do I fit in? Why do I have to fight? Why does it have to get ugly? Why does everyone scream? Why do we have to be misunderstood? Why can't we just connect? Oftentimes, individuals that are experiencing trauma bonds are associated with unhealed trauma parts or unrecognized, unaccepted trauma. Some people see things that they've gone through in their life as a state of norm versus a trauma imprint. For example, people normalize having mothers and fathers fight and yell and scream and all those kind of things, and it attached to their nervous system, making them to become afraid, making them to have a voice or a fear of having a voice, making them to get easily agitated or irritated, and they classify it as norm. There's nothing norm about a constant fighting environment. There's nothing norm about unhealed trauma. And what it does make it seem like as part of a norm is you get used to it. You kind of move into a space of survival while you're trying to overcome things like emotional manipulation, financial manipulation, security manipulation. What does security manipulation look like? Having somewhere to stay, having the threats over your head that you're in my house, and all that kind of stuff comes as security manipulation. But then you have to stop back you step back when they say, "I apologize, I didn't mean it that way," but they then turn around and do it again. I'll use me for an example. Many years ago, when I was a young mother, I would just blast off and snap out and just go to extremes. My tongue was ruthless. My tongue was hurtful. My tongue was cutting. What I didn't realize then that I recognize now, that part of my unhealed trauma was being told to sit down, be quiet, shut up. I didn't have an opinion. I didn't have a voice. So I find myself, even sometimes now, wrestling as an almost 57-year-old adult with making sure that my voice is heard, becoming irritated when I feel like it's being shut out. That's some me work that I still have to work on to ensure that I am not spreading that trauma on to anyone else. I know my presence. I know the power of my presence. And because of that, I am the one that has to be in control of how I let childhood trauma show up in my adult life. So I'm going to start with the relationship with your parents first as a trauma connection and a trauma bond. I know that so many people right now are saying that I'm going to go no contact. I'm going to disconnect from my mother and my father because they have done this, and this. And I'm not telling you that you shouldn't. I'm not telling you that you're wrong for handling things. What I am going to say is sometimes your parents have experienced trauma that you don't even know about, trauma that you didn't realize, and that's showing up in their push away from you, their seemingly jealous times of you, their inability to nurture and protect you. That is a trauma that they've carried and passed on to you, and you don't know why. You don't understand why your parent has treated you so harshly. I can tell you this, it was really nothing that you did for them to react the way that they did. They are living through a survival mechanism of trauma. They've learned, and when you sit down and you talk to so many of your mothers and your fathers, if you sit down and you talk to them, and of course, I'm going to use my family as a big example. in this part of this trauma bond conversation. Why? Because I experienced what it was like for them and with them and through them. So if you sit down and you talk to your parents and ask them questions about their childhood, their relationship with their parents, what was some of the abuse techniques, some of the discipline tactics that was used, how often, and you can ask them these questions, how often did you feel isolated and invalidated? How often did you feel like no one cared to hear from you and that they only brought you around when they needed something from you? Ask your parents those questions. You may be surprised of their response if you don't already know their response. When someone has to build a life in survival mode from trauma, they often lose a touch of their own self. Not often, 90% of the time they lose that self-identity. They're identified through their relationship with their parents, whether it be harsh or anything of that nature. I identified my relationship with my father as abandonment and rejection, with my mother as a lack of nurturing and rejection. So I had to actually work through those feelings of being rejected. And sometimes, I'll be honest, I still have to work through that. Certain things can trigger and bring that little girl up. They're saying, you won't reject me. You won't silence my voice. You won't kick me to the curb. All those kind of things. That is still an inner work in me today that I continue to be aware of. And typically the way I respond now is I just go silent. I go silent because I then need to go into a self-assessment place for me, not for anybody else, because I recognize there's a part of me, the little girl part of me, that was hurting in a moment. And when I feel rage or irritability and things of that nature, the best thing that I know to do is to go silent, go within for me and assess. Years ago, I would have came back word for word. I would have fought the whole 9 yards, but it serves no purpose. When you are trauma connected to childhood stuff, you're fighting to not look like your parents, not behave in the same manners that your parents behaved, the things that cause you to feel devoid, that cause you to feel invalidated and not seen. You're fighting hard not to see that or be that, but you end up becoming that because anything that you focus your mind heavily on. For example, if you've always felt like no one loved you, no one accepted you, that you were the source of everybody's anger and aggression, and you're saying, I don't want to be like that, but you're constantly having it in the forethought, that is going to come forward in where you are. Understand that, and I heard a powerful message the other day by the sensei, and he said, you fight often to not be like your parent, who may have given you all that they knew to give you at the time that they was raising you. You fight often to not be them, and you end up carrying them all your life because you're constantly focused on them or their behaviors that you don't want to emulate. So one of the ways that you want to kind of disconnect that link from your parenting structure, that trauma bond, is to ask yourself, who am I really? What's my true identity? I remember growing up, and as you can tell, my skin color, I have natural hazel eyes and all that kind of stuff. And I would get mocked. I would get talked about. I would get judged by my looks by family and strangers. I remember sitting at a dinner table one day, and my mother, who had suffered childhood trauma, physical abuse, sexual abuse, and all that kind of stuff had happened in her life. And my aunt, they were all sitting around the table, and my aunt jokingly said, girl, you better learn how to work those eyes early. My mother became enraged. My mother took that as a sexual connotation to manipulate men. That's not what my aunt meant, but my mother's abuse showed in that moment, and it was the fear of her abuse for her little brown girl with these hazel green eyes that she knows that grown men would target and attempt to take advantage of. So she had a right to feel the way that she felt. But what that did for me is made me ashamed of my hazel eyes. For a long time, I would look down, I would close my eyes and things of that nature because I didn't want my mother to have a negative thought about me because of what I saw that day. I've since learned to love my eyes and to appreciate them and use them in places where my eyes shine brighter when I'm speaking, when I'm out in public and things like that. I no longer shy away from people giving me compliments about my eyes. But for years, I had a concern about that. My mother's trauma caused her to be uptight, caused her to move into a space of protectiveness. I saw it as a space of being shunned and being damned and not being enough. That is how trauma can actually go from one person to another and you not understand the why behind it. I'm so grateful that I had the opportunity to talk with my mother about her childhood, her past history, and the things that she experienced because it helped me to better understand some of her decision making. Excuse me. It helped me to better understand the things that she had gone through, were going through, and how she had to overcome them. It gave me a different palette of empathy for my mother and understanding her plight. My mother was oldest of 10. My mother had to leave school very early to start sharecropping. She was the big sister not only to her siblings, but to her first generation cousins. They saw her as their protector. They saw her as her hero, but she didn't get a protector or hero. She was introduced to abuse very early, but so was her mother. My grandmother was physically abused by my grandfather. My mother was always in protective mode, and she would subsequently get abused by my grandfather as well. And I saw my mother's rage and anger when we would do something that she would dislike, and she would have us spank, or she would spank us with braided extension cords or switches or belts or whatever she can get her hands on. That's what we would get a spanking with. But then her love language was food, clothing, shelter, stuff. So it began to become a mixed feeling in my little mind that, okay, I just need to stay out of the way so that I don't have to have the wrath of her anger. And oftentimes the wrath of her anger wasn't necessarily attributed to something that I did. It could have been a sibling affair. Because one thing that Juanita Blaine would do, she would whoop us for general principle, because her goal in her mind was, I got to keep my kids out of trouble and I never want them to have run-ins with the police. So I will whoop them first. I will beat them first. I will take care of them first. As I became a mother, one of the things that I decided was that I was not going to be that same person of spanking and things of that nature. What I decided for my children was I'm going to love them through. But then this mouth showed up and was brutal. And every day, even now, I'll think back to some things that I said to my children who didn't deserve the harsh things that I said. And I'll go and apologize and they'll say something like, oh man, that's over this, that, and the other. But I am consciously aware how negative words can attach to someone's inner core. And they may not know why they're reacting the way that they're reacting until they start doing the healing work of trauma. So I'm the first to admit, I was a good mom, but I wasn't a great mom. I gave my children hell trying to raise them in the wisdom that I knew then versus the wisdom that I know now. So many times I wish that I could go backwards and change a lot of things about how I raised my children, but we know that's not true. What I can do is continue to learn from that and identify the best way to show up now when they allow. I don't force myself on them. I don't make them feel like they owe me because I'm their mother or anything like that. Because I think that's another manipulative tool that mamas have that would say some crap like, I brought you in this world and you owe me. No, you chose to be sexually active. You chose to engage in activities that led to procreation. You chose to give birth. You chose to bring them in the world. We got to own that as mothers. We have to own that as mothers. Were there some other things you could have done? Yeah, you could have possibly terminated and things of that nature. I get that. But what I'm saying is your children don't owe you just because you birthed them. You want to create safe situations where your children would want to spend time with you, where they would want to hold on and to love you and to be there for you as you age. But they don't have to. And if you stop using manipulative manners, emotional manipulative statements, you'll probably find that they'll be there for you more than what you can even begin to imagine. That's how you get to disconnect from the bad link of the trauma bond. But I will say this to you, as mothers, go to therapy. Just go to therapy. There are some things inside of you that you need to work through in your own traumas. Don't allow your pride to stop you from the healing that you deserve, the identity that you deserve. You don't have to keep walking around in that mask, being the bad mama, the mean mama, the grouchy grandmama, and all that kind of stuff. You don't. You really don't. Find you a therapist that will create a safe space so that you can begin to delve into those trauma bonded situations that are pouring out onto your children and subsequently your grandchildren. Now, let me talk about the dad for a moment because I can't do one without the other. My father was an absent father growing up, except for holidays every now and then, graduations, and a little child support. He didn't know, I believe, how to be present in our life because he wrestled with his own identity of being present in the life with his mother and father. Now, I adored my grandfather. To this day, if I could sit in his presence and have a conversation with him, I would. My grandmother was mean and edgy, and my father caught a lot of that energy, and then he also carried on that energy. He was physically abusive, he was mentally abusive, he was aggressive in a lot of ways, and then I blame a lot of that from his time in the Marine Corps, a couple of tours in Vietnam and things of that nature. But one thing about him, there were some life lessons that he taught me early on. The first thing he said is, churches will have you tithe to them, but you need to tithe to yourself first in order for you to build your own network. The second thing is, don't buy everything that's a trend. Buy lasting things because it's always going to come back around. But when it came to nurturing and loving and the guidance from my father, he wasn't present. And we would bump heads because I was different from my siblings. I ain't have to have him in my life and would tell him, you ain't never been here. Why would I want you to be here now? And at a point in my 20s, I decided to change my delivery. So I asked about his childhood. I asked about what he thought a relationship would be like with his adult children. I asked him, did he want a relationship? I could only ask about myself because everybody else needed to bridge the gap for themselves. And subsequently, that was my dude. That was my guy. We talked, we laughed up until time before him transitioning, I'm so grateful that I was present for both of my parents' transition, because what I know is when people transition, they will only transition in spaces where they believe that they're safe, especially when it's a natural transition, not like a gunshot wound and things of that nature. But they'll transition when people around them make them feel safe. So I'm grateful for that I learned how to disconnect from the bonds that were established in my parents' childhood. And I recognized that I didn't need to carry that. Now, I will tell you one thing, and it became a burden for me that I carried, and it took me probably a year ago, year and a half ago, to recognize the burden that it was. My mom would always say, y'all are all you got. My dad would say, you're your brothers and sisters' keepers. And I held that to my heart. Hell, in fact, I even told my children that same foolishness. While it's a good gesture, one of the things in a fit of grief, I said to my parents out loud, y'all lied to me. Y'all had me believing that I was responsible for being my siblings' keeper. And the lie was you didn't make anybody responsible for being mine. Too many times was I left in spaces of feeling abandoned and rejected by my own siblings. And I would keep fighting, trying to build relationship, trying to come back in and all those kind of things. And I recognized that it wasn't my fight, because it wasn't my identity. It wasn't my mission. It wasn't my purpose. When I became aware of that, I accepted the sibling relationships the way that I did, and I no longer had that burden on my back. That thing was heavy. It was heavy. Trying to, when my mother died, trying to keep everybody together and corral them and show up as a sibling force, that thing was heavy. When they all went silent on me after my mother passed and I couldn't understand, that thing was heavy. When I went through the battle of feeling rejected and abandoned by my siblings, that thing was heavy. But I recognized that I could release the trauma. I could release that link that had me burdened to situations and people and promises that I didn't make. And when you recognize that you are empowered to no longer carry what somebody else is putting down, you win. You come out of that place of being overtaken and overwhelmed and anxiety and depression and all those other things that become attached. So I'm going to move on to children. Currently, there are a lot of children that are taxing their parents with this, you gave birth to me, so you owe me. Well, no, they really don't. The law says food, clothing, shelter up to 18. That's the law. The heart of the parent may say, if you mistreat me, I'm going to cut you off and I'm no longer going to be a doormat. Or the heart of a parent may say, it don't matter how you treat me, I'm going to always be there, because the mind reminds you of when nobody was there for you. And so you get tricked and sucked in sometimes. I see a lot of parents who don't have an identity outside of their children and outside of their grandchildren, who are struggling to feel respected, to feel heard, to feel appreciated. Well, you really don't have to struggle with that when you recognize, who am I? One, as a human. Two, as a parent. And three, as a grandparent. I saw a video on TikTok where a young lady mocked the song or emulated the song, where the fans that asking where were the grands, where were the grandmamas telling them they need to go and sit themselves down, and there was a grandmother that came back and said, no, boo, we're not sitting down, we have a hot grand summer, and shook her passport to it. And I thought it was hilarious, but it reminded me that there are some expectations that children have on their parents that they wouldn't want their parents to have on them. Like, you expect your parent to help you out when you have a financial bind, or help you out with your grandchildren, or help you out of situations, have a revolving door to be able to be there for you. But when their parent needs you, can you get somebody else to do it? All those kind of excuses and things. Well, it works both ways. What you want to do is ask your parent their thoughts about their parenting and their thoughts about you as a child, the same way that you want to assess yourself as a child. What do you bring to the table as a child? Is it always wanting or needing something? Is it always this expectation that your parents have to show up as grandparents? Listen, let me tell y'all something. My grandmother was not a rocking chair grandmother. She was not one of them grandmothers that you was finna saddle her with a whole bunch of children and sit on a chair and rock and things of that nature. Contrary to this belief that your grandmother just wanted to sit around and wait for grandchildren to come along and things of that nature, back in the day, my grandmother was born in 1920. During those times, women had no voice. They couldn't develop their own identity, and that followed them throughout their life. So a lot of times they became parents under duress. They became grandparents under duress, and they never really got the opportunity to live their life. Well, fast forward, we aren't those same grandmothers. We work jobs, we run businesses, we travel, we hang out, we have friends, we have relationships, and then we may spend some time with the grandbabies. But that doesn't mean that we have to. You have to disconnect this ideal that a grandparent owes the grandchildren or must show up this way, that way, or the other. That's a trauma-linked connection. And literally, a lot of people who feel like that, they're trying to get from their parent what the parent didn't give to them, and they're hoping that they can give it to their child or children. But do you really want it like that? Or do you want it to come freely? Again, you need to get in and identify, what are my true expectations that are, one, am I linking my expectations to trauma? Or is this a situation that I concocted for myself, believing that this is something that I deserved? So you really want to check into that and identify, because some of y'all treat y'all parents bad and then expect them to give up their life for you and your kids. Man, stop doing that. Stop doing it. Let's move on as we talk about the trauma bond associated with relationships, which is one area that I specialize in to help individuals to identify how to heal first within themselves and then in a relationship. Oftentimes, going into a relationship, we're looking for someone to fill the gaps and voids that we've experienced most of our life. If we felt the void of a nurturing mother, that man may be looking for someone that will nurture him, but he may become easily irritable when it seems like it's overwhelming. That woman may be looking for the void of her dad not being there, and she may become easily irritable when it feels like her partner is trying to father her. The children get caught up in those things when the two people in the relationship have connected over trauma bonds, because they begin to become each other's enemy when they shouldn't. They should have selected becoming partners versus fighting and being the enemy. So what that means is having to actually go back into yourself first. You've got to be able to tap into yourself and ask yourself a few questions. Who am I? What trauma am I carrying? How is that trauma showing up in my right now life, in my right now relationships? And how do I want to heal? When you ask yourself those questions, you will begin to evolve into the person that you authentically were created to be. When you then sprinkle in understanding your purpose, having a clearer understanding of relationship, you can assess, is this connection healthy for me first? I think that all partners need to ask themselves, whether you're married, coupled, throupled, whatever it is, ask yourself, is this relationship for me, or am I for the relationship? Am I healed enough to be in this relationship, or are we connecting because of our trauma? Because we may have felt unsupported. May have experienced some type of lack, or failed to understandings. We may have experienced some rejection, abandonment. We may have been told things like, and I know so many young people that were told they're never going to be nothing, they're going to end up this way or that way, not having a lot of family support, and my heart breaks for them because they didn't deserve that. Those words spewed from the mouth of a parent or any other relative was their own hurt, their own disappointment in their lives, not yours. So if you are one of those individuals who are battling with being enough, who are battling with, validation and love and acceptance, go ahead and give yourself permission to let all of that go. Let go of those negative words that told you had no value. Let go of those situations or circumstances that have made you feel as if you're a burden to everybody else. Let go of the situations that no longer represent the you that you desire to become. Let them go. They've held you long enough. They've held you hostage long enough. You no longer have to operate in a state of anger. I shared with a client the other day who was talking about growing up without a father, trying to parent, and trying to identify their own states of anger. And I said to them, anger is a secondary emotion. What was your truth? What was your true emotion? And I said, I'll give you some hints and you can choose from there. Rejection, abandonment, disappointment, feelings of being let down, feelings of sadness. And he responded, all of those things. When you tap into the connection to your anger, you can reduce the impact of your trauma bond. When you identify how that trauma shows up in your right now life, you can reduce the impact of the trauma bond. You get a do-over. I heard someone say the other day that life isn't etched in stone, but written on a canvas that can be erased. All of the things that you've gone through in your life have created certain bonds, some traumatic, some not. But you want to ask yourself, what is my association with what I'm feeling and where is this coming from? Oftentimes people are getting into a relationship because it's a societal thing to do. But was that right for you? Was that the right move for you? Oftentimes people want to become parents and they may choose someone that's not the best parent for them to co-parent with. Was that right for you? There are a lot of things about our past that we can't change. There's nothing about our past that we can go back and change. We can learn from it. I heard Tyler Perry say on the Den of Kings that when he was asked a question about failures, he responded, I don't have any failures. I have lessons. Everything about our life is a lesson to get to the next level. You can choose whether you're going to take the positive or the negative lesson to build you up or tear you down. But you don't have to stay connected in a trauma bonded situation where nobody's willing to heal, including you. You have to be honest with yourself. Do I want to experience some form of healing? Do I want to let all of this stuff go so that I can begin to thrive? If the answer is yes, make a commitment to yourself. Make a commitment to assess what you think your trauma associated bonds are. Identify what those characteristics are, and then make a conscious, intentional decision to change how you're moving in those things. You're better than the trauma that was placed on your life. You have purpose, and I want you to live in that and walk in it. Tap into why you're here on this big old rock. We all got a purpose. Live in that. So until the next episode of Authentically Peculiar with Marcia, I want you to begin to really identify what is my link to trauma and how do I want to reverse it. So stay tuned, stay focused, and always stay authentically peculiar. Take good care.